Hi, and welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. We've got great panelists, as we always do, and frankly, great friends. These are some great colleagues that we've all known each other either for 5 minutes or for 5 years, but we become friends very quickly because we share experiences and knowledge and things like that. So before I get to our topic, my name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with TechStrong Group, who puts on these video shows, and with our production team. And our production team is actually both a combination of TechStrong Group and our sponsor, Tricentis. We have great thanks, and we really love the collaboration that we have with our team and our partners at Tricentis. Great company to work with, and we appreciate one of our panelists here today is also from Tricentis. So with that, our topic is about hyperscaling DevOps, and we're going to get into what that means and kind of maybe where we're going next and how do we do that based on what we've learned. So let me first start with Parag. Would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about Tricentis. I didn't say much about what you do other than working with us. And of course, tell us about yourself too.
Sure, Mitch. Hey, thank you guys. Happy to be here again. Happy to speak to everyone. My background, I am the VP of Engineering at Tricentis, an absolutely outstanding company that tries to make DevOps real so that you have the assurance you need when you deploy your applications at the speed of your imagination. So I run engineering. We provide software testing products here at Tricentis. And I've been both a developer, tester, a builder, actually building large-scale complex systems and organizations of hundreds of people to actually do that, whether software products or digital transformation for large companies as well as small ones.
Fantastic. Living the dream, it sounds like, Parag, so to say.
Indeed.
Tracy, good friend, and I don't know if it's okay to call you a regular, but you're pretty close if you're not already. Good to have you on the show again today. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about DeployHub.
Thank you. I am the CEO and co-founder of DeployHub. We kind of fit into this topic quite well in terms of kind of hyperscaling the DevOps process. DeployHub governs the supply chain of your software, in particular around microservices, so that you can deliver secure, high-quality microservices at scale. And that is really the discussion for today, is how do we do this stuff at scale?
Fantastic. And last but not least is Larry. Larry, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and a little bit of your background, your company as well.
Yeah, sure. The most relevant experience for this conversation is that I led the DevSecOps transformation program at Comcast, 600 development teams over the course of 5 years. We essentially replaced the traditional AppSec program with this developer first approach. And we hit a wall at some point where we couldn't do DevSecOps without doing DevOps. And so we actually had to morph after about 100 teams to being a DevOps transformation program so we could build on that. So I have a lot of experience essentially doing that. I'm now at Contrast Security, basically doing the same thing, except helping clients at Contrast Security adopt DevOps and DevSecOps.
Fantastic. And I was part of that industry and observed that transformation. It's pretty phenomenal to observe and what was accomplished at Comcast. So our topic is hyperscaling DevOps, and part of our kind of prep for our panel we were talking about is hyperscaling about like taking it to the next level, or is there some kind of future state of DevOps, or is it scaling it more horizontally? And I know from my own experience, whether it's creating a product or running organizations, doing something on a team or two is fantastic because you can really focus and kind of get things going, figure out how to do it and get it working. Doing that across a large organization or a large number of teams, getting that adoption, it's not just buy-in, but adoption, really using it where you're really running kind of on all cylinders, as they say, is no small feat. That's a huge task and a great admiration for folks that are able to do that. Is hyperscaling DevOps one, the other, both, or is something else that I'm not describing? Maybe Larry, if you would kind of start a conversation here.
Yeah, sure. So I tend to think when I think of at scale, I think of across an entire organization. So 600 development teams in the case, 10,000 developers in the case of Comcast. the trouble there is that not every development team, in fact, no two development teams are the same, and they all start with a different level of maturity. My last few months at Comcast, I was working with a team that I asked them, well, where's the code? Where's the source code repository? Where, can I take a look? And they're like, oh, well, that's not up to date. I'm like, what do you mean that's not up to date? Well, we only put it in there when we have to. Well, how do you work together as a 5-person team? Oh, we have a shared drive. So
Larry's laughing.
I was working with teams like that. In the last month I was there, that's 30 years after source code repositories were popular, to teams that were on the leading edge of trunk-based development and feature toggles and traffic shaping, high-end, sort of like the cream of the crop kind of DevOps practices.
Interesting. Jump in, team.
So I'll jump in here. First, I'll sort of speak to what Larry mentioned, because I see that, and I'll tell you from a background of working in very large $100 billion types of enterprises to smaller companies, startups, scale-ups, right? I think what Larry said is absolutely true. I've seen companies that say, okay, pound their fist and say, all the source code needs to be here, and then consolidate. Okay, is it back in the days of ClearCase, or is it back GitHub, Git this, GitLab, whatever, right? And every team is doing things differently. I think there's a maturity of that governance that the corporation needs to follow. So to me, it's not like hyperscaling DevOps is like the destination. Let's get all 10,000 development teams for a $100 billion company to do the same thing the same way. That's very, very hard to do, especially if you're trying to grow your company from a startup to a scale up to a large public company. You have to go with the journey where your organization can mature along the way. So I've had to even take back some of my, I'll call it bigoted thoughts, like everybody should be able to see all the source code. It should be at the same place. We should have inventories that things can be renewed automatically and so forth. I'd know when things would expire. When do we need to patch things? When's my third-party licensing going to expire? It's not practical to expect that all on day one. So I'd say that organizational change, having the ability to grow with your company and expect a level of maturity along the way. I came at it sort of opposite from Larry, more of a DevOps first mindset, and we'd have pockets of excellence, pockets of teams that we'd say, okay, we allow them to deploy every week, every day, while other teams, they can't deploy but a couple times a year, right? And things in between. And so how do you enable all of these different teams with all these different maturities along with your company's maturity? That requires, perhaps in our case, we had to do DevOps first. And then we said, okay, wait, now we're scanning our containers. And now I need to do DevSecOps. And I need to have dynamic scans, not just static scans. So you just mature along the way and try to accommodate as many teams as you can. That's what I've seen in our transformations.
Yeah, so I exactly the way I think. It's take every team wherever they are now and get them on the path to improvement in this gradual improvement ramp, and coach them along that path with self-service tools. So you have to do a lot of toolsmithing to make it easy. And I think Tracy's going to want to chime in here with this, because having a nice sort of offering of templates and sort of canned capability that makes it easy for them to adopt a practice. So toolsmithing is key. And then coaching is the other thing that's key. You're not an auditor, you're not a gatekeeper. You need a person that's there to help them. Assuming they want to do their best and to help them get the best out of it. Tracy, I'm curious about your toolsmithing.
You've been called, Tracy. You have to respond.
I know. So there's a lot to unpack in that question. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. But I think we should see it as, let's just think about it as an XY graph. On the X line, we have compliance. I don't really like to think of this in terms of tools, even though tools are an important part of it. But if we think about the X line as compliance, what are we trying to achieve in our DevOps process? Because if you identify it in terms of tools, every team may need some other kind of tool. So then it makes it more difficult to create this graph. So the X line is the compliance level. The Y line is the adoption. So we need to, if we're going to hyperscale our DevOps processes, we need to really have a complete X line where we have every compliance level that we want. And in terms of the adoption, we want it to be a pretty flat line across the top. We don't want it to be peaks and valleys, meaning some teams may be doing a really great job of security, and other teams may not be doing any of it. And other teams might be doing a great job of automating their releases. And other teams may not be doing a good job. So we need to be able to see our compliance levels and understand them and communicate them, and then begin tracking that Y line to understand the level of adoption and compliance across the teams. Now, that's just from an enterprise perspective and building out kind of what I like to call a compliance scorecard, and they're beginning to track who's adopting those compliance levels. And as and there's so much to talk about in terms of hyperscaling DevOps, in particular in microservices. But if we just think about monolithic, Larry's ideas about or suggestions about templating and being able to quickly stand up a team that has all of the tools that they want to choose and use that's appropriate for them, that meets that compliance level. The better we can get at doing that, the faster we will scale. Interesting.
It's a very kind of nice way to organize, compartmentalize, like what are you trying to accomplish it? How do you measure it? And then on top of that, I think something you said, Larry, is you do have to meet people where they are, right? Not everyone is skilled in the same ways or operates the same way. They need some level of flexibility and autonomy, not rigid compliance from that perspective. And they're going to respect and adopt it more easily, I think, if you're adopting of them.
Yeah, Mitch. How can you flatten that y-axis? That's the trick.
Mitch, do you mind if I share a diagram that's it's not the exact same thing that Tracy has because it's circular instead of X and Y, but it's got a lot of what I think she's talking about.
Go for it. Yeah, I'm curious to see what you're talking about.
So this was the way we visualized maturity of different business units inside of Comcast. And we could render the graph for all 600 teams, but you couldn't drill down to individual teams with this. But this is a business unit that had 10 different development teams. And so we have this maturity concept of this darker shade of green is you've adopted it to the level of culture, meaning you're getting full value out of it and you're doing it for every opportunity that you could be doing it for. And so these are the lists of practices around the outside here. That's your compliance dimension. Compliance levels dimension. And this is only 11 of the 40 practices in the overall framework, but they were the key 11 that we were focused on this year. We call them the essential 11 for that year. And we could meet with an individual business unit leader and say, okay, well, you're doing great on secrets management, but you guys aren't doing so hot on threat modeling. You're doing okay on threat modeling, but you're doing worse on these sort of adoption of scanning tools in your pipeline. And you've barely gotten started on this team peer review concept here for your teams. So security team peer review. So this is the way you look at it, moment in time. And if you click on each one of these, you can drill down to the individual team. And then this is the trend over time. So you can see the teams maturing over time in there. And we gamified the whole thing. So the whole thing had a scorecard that each business unit would get a reward if they had the most improvement in the 90 days. We had silly games like one business unit leader challenged another business unit leader to improve the most. And the loser had to wear a bunny outfit, bunny costume during Easter week or the week before Easter. So, it really made it fun and made the whole thing essentially gradual and gamified with visualizations like what Tracy was describing.
Okay, now Parag, we've had the XY, we've had the The circle graph, yeah, your job is to put it into a pie chart for us.
Coordinates today.
Or scatter a data scatter plot, whatever your choice. I'm curious your perspective. You're running an engineering team, obviously, sizable one.
One thing I'd say with what Larry and Tracy said is, I sort of like Tracy's sort of generic view, right? And then Larry had a very good, I don't know if you want to call it a radar chart of maturity, right? And when I'm dealing with triage situations, actually developing code that meets, delights, not just meets our customer expectations, but delights our customers. And it's a SaaS. I've got to keep it running and I've got to keep it secure. I think I probably need like 10 different radar charts, right? So there's so many facets. There's security, which is you peel that onion and we all know the defense in depth. And okay, it's not just access, it's data, it's everything. There's security. How quickly do you respond to security? How do you work with your customers? In our case, we're an ISV. So we also try to create a bridge between our CISOs sometimes and say, can we get some private channel communication access? Because we can never predict when things happen. Everybody might remember the whole Log4j fund we had last end of last year, right? So we like to do that. But then now when I think beyond security, then also it's operations, what's availability, disaster recovery, how well are you able to do your tabletop exercises and things like that? And no matter how much we prepare and how much money we invest, it's always those outages that we never thought of, the unknown that still gets us. So I see so many different facets. I didn't even talk about dev velocity. Right.
But at scale, Parag, I think what you have to do is you have to basically stop as a leader of a big organization, trying to sort of look at each of those things for an individual app or individual team, unless you're a one app company, and what you can do instead is you have to say, package those things, those concepts up. For instance, monitoring. Absolutely. And you, as a practice that teams can adopt at various different levels, thoughts, words, actions, culture. And you define those levels and then they, you encourage them to sort of each individually adopt them. So at scale, it's less about you being aware of all those metrics yourself and more about making sure the team themselves is aware of it and they're working towards getting better at responding or improving that metric.
Absolutely agree, Larry, because there's no way you could say, okay, let's put up that radar chart and then say, that's how I'm measuring you. You actually want to ingrain that knowledge as people are actually doing their development. They're thinking security while they're building so that we prevent having those kinds of issues. Scan left shift. We always talk about left shift with DevOps, right? Left shift so that you can prevent creation of critical CVEs before they even get out of the development phase, out of the developer's laptop, if that's where they're developing right there, so that what looks like you're going to have in production is actually running on your laptop. And so I think that's part of it. I think as my vantage point, I have security folks that say, okay, Parag, get your engineers to do better and better with security, and we provide the training. And then I have operations folks that ask, okay, we need to have better availability. We need to have early warning. We need to have alerts. And then I have development teams and QA teams that say, okay, we need to do regression tests, add this to the regression test. So there's so many different things that are coming together. And a lot of times what I have to do is I have to know the maturity of my teams and say, okay, what is the theme of this quarter that I'm going to really make an improvement?
What's the focus practices this quarter? And get the whole org to sort of rally around that, improve that.
And that it begins to be a part of the conversation that we seldom ever have. And that's taking a really good look at ourselves from how we got here. Right. And understand that when we first started doing DevOps, pipeline, lifecycle management, upper management had some investment in it. They saw it as something that they had to, that needed to be done. But to be quite honest, most of the tooling that the developers brought in, how many people really did a POC around Jenkins? It was just brought in by developers and they started pulling this stuff together. We have never really taken this as serious as we should. And to be honest, the security puzzle, we have failed as a global community. We have really failed on understanding the importance of security. Even today, I walk into organizations and I look at build scripts that are still using star.star. I hate that because I know that means that can suck anything up from the directory that it wants to and put it in a package. SBOMs, we've had those for quite some time. Do we use them? We might generate them, but do we do anything with them or look at them? Even CVEs. Yeah, we might look at it once in a while. So we have to.
I think if you're doing DevOps, you're not looking at it once in a while. You're not looking at it at all. You're essentially putting a tool. You're putting a tool in the.
That's your point.
That is my point.
You shouldn't be looking at it. My point is you shouldn't be looking at it. You should put a tool in the pipeline that automatically checks it for you.
Yes,
so,
I
Tracy,
understand that.
Go, Tracy.
Okay.
I understand that, Larry. My point is that we haven't had upper management really focus on this area, provide the proper funding and the staff to be able to automate all of these pieces. And we're still doing a lot manually. We still have a lot of plug-in scripts that we're doing. We don't have the kind of tooling that you're talking about, Larry. DeployHub is trying to solve that problem too, have a central place for all that DevOps intelligence so you can find it. But from our history, if we look at how we've done this in the past, it's been through a lot of one-off scripts. It's been a lot of duct tape and a lot of open source. So upper management has to start understanding that there needs to be substantial investment in the DevOps practice to automate, to bring in better tooling, to bring in tools that can do broader metrics so that we can solve this problem and go as fast as we need to.
The way to hook upper management, you can usually get them to agree to an experiment with 10 teams. And then the way to hook upper management to sort of scale every year, which is the way I did it at Comcast, from 10 teams the first 6 months to 50 teams the first year and a half, et cetera, all the way to 600 teams, is you gather the metrics of the results. And so we had 1/4 the cost. We were doing security at 1/4 the cost of the traditional AppSec program when you consider the number of developers we were serving. And we had 6x fewer vulnerabilities in production, 1/6 as many vulnerabilities in production for teams after they went through our program. You show those numbers to executives and they go, why don't we get rid of our old AppSec program, which is eventually what Comcast decided to do.
Both of you are right, Larry and Tracy. See, like what Larry, you're giving us is little cookbooks that say, hey, look, show this, get your executive buy-in. I think I said this on one of the DevOps Unbound. I think sponsorship is an extremely thing to understand. There's too many facets. We're talking, we always say people, process, technology. We're talking about all three simultaneously. And if we say, look, I'm going to get you this many CVEs out, I'm going to left shift all these tools and all, there's some sheer inertia that we have in our industry that allows sponsorship to sustain it over a decade or at least even over 1 or 2 years. Every company I've been at, it's taking 3 to 6 months to just build out the technology platform. Forget the whole cultural shift. And do they really want the transformation? When I've worked for $100 billion companies, after some of the largest hacks they've ever been through, okay, they said, Parag, come in and let's go transform this large company. Okay, the sponsorship can last maybe 6 months to a year, but usually things are underestimated just because it takes so long to put together. Okay, I got Jenkins, Circle CI, Bamboo. I've got one of everything problem in the DevOps space. Mm-hmm. So starting with rationalizing. Then what does left shift even mean? Okay, and how much funding do I really need? Okay, to get on all these aspects, because cloud and DevOps, it's all about that automation, right? One click, self-service, immediate gratification of all facets: security, operations, development velocity, defect leakage rate, release on demand with confidence. That's where we try to provide some value in the market. I'm just saying it's too big. And unless you have the sponsorship really wanting that transformation, then it's really hard to get buy-in. I think you get buy-in in stages. And
yeah, I think the way you stage it, though, is not one tool at a time or one set of practices at a time. It's one small set of teams at a time. So there's always a few teams that are more ready than others to get started. started. And so if you start with those teams and you measure the results and you turn what they're doing into a pattern, a recipe that you can share with other teams, then the whole thing sort of snowballs. And
not only that, Larry, you're absolutely right. You market it. It becomes your early win.
Right.
Small enough. And then you get, instead of forcing people, which I've rarely seen work, people are like, I want to be like that team. They're able to release every
exactly.
day.
Developers want to be the cool kid, right? They want the one that, he has the best tools and is using the best tech and yeah.
So I'll just say, be patient on that journey. Depending on the size of your enterprise, you have to be patient. And when you're small, I thought that could be more nimble as well. Well, then, you don't have the resources you do when you're in a large enterprise, right? And the skills may not have kept up to date as much as when you're in large enterprise, you can pull resources from other departments. So
there's an interesting dichotomy here, I think, which is kind of what got us here is sort of the bottoms up. Tracy mentioned, who approved Jenkins coming in. Nobody did. Somebody decided to do it and we adopted it, right? And somebody went to their manager and said, you need to buy this thing because we're already using it everywhere. But on the other hand, kind of to use the hyperscale term again, you have to take a systemic look at the whole system and how do you help adoption, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's things that help with individual teams and adoption. And you don't want to kind of kill the goose that laid the golden egg, which is that innovation and entrepreneurial spirit or whatever that helps people bring new things in and try new ideas. But you also, there's a phrase that goes after every edict, which is this too shall pass, right? There'll be another edict that follows that. Those don't work very well either. But I'm curious, Tracy, you're tackling, with DeployHub, a particularly meaty problem, which is, the little Pokemons we call containers and microservices and things like that can go everywhere, and suddenly you don't know what you're doing and can't manage it. That's kind of the same problem we have with organizations, and how do we start to bring some structure and organization to it?
Yeah, so if we think about the way we have managed these monolithic projects, and what Parag and Larry said are completely right. When you are rolling out a DevOps process, start with a group of teams, and then you can roll that process out across the organization over time. But we are in the middle of a shift, and that shift is pretty disruptive. And that shift makes us less of individual teams and more of a larger collaborative organization, where if we're doing microservices and cloud native at scale, it means that we are going to decompose parts and we're going to be reusing parts. So not everybody has to write a login routine, for example. You might have a security group that writes the login routine and everybody uses it, which means that we start becoming more of a central group as opposed to siloed teams. So we have to start understanding how we can better manage these pipelines, how we can work harder to be more collaborative and get, the GitHub folks have been telling us to be more collaborative for years and years and years. They've said, open up your repository so everybody can see the code. And yes, those bigoted ideas we might have to let go of, but there is some truth to it. There's absolutely some truth to it. And if we're going to do cloud native at scale, we have to think in a different way. I think what's happening at the CD Foundation around CD events and having an event process where you don't necessarily have to, you could have that x-axis that have all the compliance levels, and your CD process has a payload that's going to be initiated through an event listener, regardless of what tool that you have underneath under the covers that your team decides to use because it's best for your platform. And how do we start really understanding the whole supply chain and how the supply chain is impacted? What's the risk level of a particular microservice? So in other words, as I often say, our DOOR metrics might be getting a little long in the tooth, and we might need to expand them in a decomposed, truly service-oriented, I should say microservice-oriented architecture, because it's going to change. One microservice could cause the 5 or 6 different application teams to need to retest before it goes out because it has a high risk value. So there's just different ways we need to start understanding the pipeline, and that and shifting and being disrupted is sometimes okay. And it should take us to a place where we can go faster, regardless of what teams are actually implementing it. And if they do want to implement it, they have a listener that will solve that problem. And, I'm betting on the catalogs, pulling that data into a central catalog. So, this microservice is being deployed by Helm. This particular Salesforce object is just got a script behind it. These are the key value pairs. These are the CVEs for this microservice. And how does that roll up to an application level? So we have a lot to think about in solving these problems. And that's what we've been working on at the open source project Ortelius and the CD Foundation with their events. We're looking at how we have to disrupt that pipeline and make it where we can scale easily.
Yeah,
it's good to see people are collaborating outside the organization too, Tracy, to work on these problems, because it's bigger than any one organization is going to solve on their own.
Yes, absolutely. It's a community discussion we have to have. And I really believe that the security discussion, the DevSecOps discussion is starting to trickle up all the way. I think upper management has heard it loud and clear. And I believe that will help fund some of these better tooling, improvement in how the pipeline actually functions, how much more secure the pipeline is, how well does it run? If it's just got those one-off scripts, they break pretty easy. And that pipeline becomes a more critical factor. It's almost like upper management's finally realizing that they're making products and they have an assembly line. If that assembly line breaks down every day or is hard for every team to jump on, and they all each want to make a full shoe all at the same time, like a cobbler, that they have a problem.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? So
exactly.
When you have something like Log for Shell or Spring for Shell, hit, that's a great time to have a conversation with executives about more funding. So,
in fact, to back that up, I think I'm glad you made that connection, because the dichotomy that we're talking about here is all this new technology knowledge, building out a platform, shared services, or a shared catalog. I call it service catalog. Pulling all that together is a centralization effect that we're saying, okay, we've got maybe 10 out of 100 teams that are really stellar in all the things Larry mentioned about, and let's do some internal PR for that. So we're pushing, all three of us are pushing for that centralization so we can expand that greatness across an enterprise. But then I've also seen that if you centralize too fast, you can actually slow things down.
Well, and not just too fast, but too much. I mean, every team has a different context. They're targeting maybe even a completely different market. And they certainly have different skilled people on their team. And so you have to sort of have something, a catalog. I like your use of the phrase catalog. You pull it together into a catalog, and it can't be a smorgasbord with a million different options, because that's impossible to manage and you'll never scale that way. But there has to be at least some flexibility in there to accommodate the various levels of
organization needs to publish. This is the reusable artifact. This is where you go to get stuff from other teams, right? So there's some notion of catalog, whether it's at the service level or even data catalogs and product catalogs, right? So we have this notion of centralizing. And I think the second point I was saying, follow up what Tracy said is, and you also said, Larry, never let a crisis go to waste. I believe security is forcing us to mature, right? So whereas before we were trying to get the sponsorship and say, we should do this because it's the right thing to do. Okay, now it's, you must do this, and you can either catch it while the product is being built, software product is being built, or software service is being built, or you could catch it too late and use your customers as your testers to say, hey, I found that critical CVE. And so this is why I think the maturity that we're all driving, because security wasn't put into DevOps terminology, now we forced it in there. It's forcing us all to mature and say, see those 10 teams out of 100? We all need to be like them, because otherwise...
The chief software architect at Comcast, we wanted a more central funded sponsored DevOps transformation program. He couldn't pull it off until we had enough of these security crises. And I was then starting to say, we can't do true shift left security, true DevSecOps until we have true DevOps. And we only have that for about 100 of the 600 teams. We need a program to mature the remaining 500 up to a level where they can do that. And so I went in to the president with him. I helped him over the weekend draft this multi-million-dollar proposal. And then I met with him with the president on Monday, and we presented where he got the funding to actually do the DevOps transformation program.
Which is key to your success, is that upper management buy-in. Absolutely. You couldn't have done it without it. And not every organization has gotten there. And I think the security question and the security threats, the real security threats that we're facing, is what's going to drive that discussion at the upper level and bring the Larrys in on a weekend brainstorming to get the job done.
With that, I think we're going to let you have the last word, Tracy. It's been a fascinating conversation, and all three of you, I think there's just a fertile ground of great ideas and experiences here about scaling DevOps, because it's no easy challenge, and we're living it. All of you are living that process too. So, I want to thank all three of our panelists, Parag, Tracy, and Larry. Also want to mention too, speaking of interesting conversations, we have coming up on May 24th, Tricentis is doing their virtual summit, and we're actually hosting a DevOps Unbound segment that will be part of the conference. And we're talking about creating positive digital experiences. So we can imagine how this fits into that kind of a conversation. So through testing. So I hope you'll join the Tricentis team and join us as part of that conversation there on May 24th. You can go to virtualsummit.tricentis.com. So nice to have a tie-in there for you, Parag, with the Tricentis folks.
And I'll add one thing. All three of us talked about, right? Unless you have the confidence to move that quickly, I believe that none of our visions will come true, right? So that's where we come in and say, okay, let's give our users confidence.
Agreed. Well, thank you, Parag. Thank you very much, Tracy. Thank you, Larry, so much, all of you, for sharing your experiences. I want to do a shout out to my co-host, Alan Schimmel, who's not able to join us today. And also a big shout out to our production team, Lanier and Jody, and the folks that do all of our video work. We appreciate what you do as well, too. So thank you to you, our audience. We appreciate you spending this time with us. We look forward to next time we see you on DevOps Unbound. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.